Hello, and thank you and welcome to our webinar, The Usage Pricing Revolution, Managing Data to Unlock Success. Today we'll be talking about data, staging mediation, integration, and automation for usage-based pricing.
Recording in progress.
Today we'll be talking about the transforming market, understanding the power of data staging and mediation and driving growth with data staging and mediation, and then really get into the details of how to build that foundation, as well as then a little bit about the future of data in usage-based pricing. Our stars of the show today will be Igor Stenmark with MGI Research and Yusuf Yagmor with BluLogix. And why don't I let them take it away from here? Igor?
I love it how you describe us as the stars of a show.
You're the rock stars.
If you could allow me to share.
All right, I'm going to stop sharing. You should be able to go ahead.
Terrific. Thank you so much. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you guys may be. This is Igor Stenmark. I'm one of the research analysts at MGI Research, and welcome to today's webinar, Managing Data to Unlock Success, kind of what's happening with the usage pricing revolution. I'll start with a very, very short introduction, who MGI Research is, just in case you've never attended one of our events or read any of our research and monetization. So we are an independent research advisory firm. We focus on enterprise software, and specifically within that, we pay a lot of attention to topics such as monetization. And even more specifically, we have a lot of expertise in billing, CPQ, contract management, mediation, e-commerce systems. So we really focus on enterprise systems, but really touch and process money. We have 3 key audiences that we serve. We work with technology buyers, so with executives at mid to large size organizations that are looking to make investments in technology. We also work with technology suppliers, helping them refine their strategies and figure out their go-to-market motions. And we also work with institutional technology investors. In the course of a year, we speak with hundreds of companies, helping them make better, more informed decisions, minimize risk, and optimize some of the costs. So we're going to be talking a lot about data today, and we're going to be talking about usage billing. So every time I'm in a conversation with someone about usage billing, I typically hear one of 3 things, or maybe a combination of those. So one is usage billing is coming. Second, usage billing, oh, that's very simple. I can do this with my hands tied behind my back. Or usage billing is just too complex. We don't have resources. We don't have expertise. We will never get there. So all 3 could be right, and all 3 could be completely wrong as well. So usage billing is coming. Oh, come on. It's been coming for about 1 million years. It's been here since the beginning of times. That's a business model that exists in nature, you could say, in nature of business. So it's been coming. If you haven't noticed it coming for the last, 30, 40 years, you haven't been paying attention, obviously. Usage billing is very simple. That can be true. Most billing products today can take a batch file, load it into a system once a month, do a batch run, and produce invoices. Not a big deal. But it can also be very, very complex. So both ends of a spectrum can be true at the same time. So what's important, we think, is for companies to understand, how do I leverage this? How do I turn it to my advantage? How can I utilize it to drive growth in my business, to improve engagement with my customers and prospects? How do I generate nonlinear transformation in my business outcomes? So what does it take? And if I'm gonna adopt usage billing, what do I need to know? What are the practical things that I need to understand? What skill sets do I need? What technologies I need to have in place? What kind of investments have to be made? So at a very simplistic level, usage billing 101. Usage billing customers are charged based on consumption. If I sign up to consume electricity and I consume 1 kilowatt, I get priced 2 kilowatts, 3 kilowatts, and so on. It's a very simple model that almost everyone is familiar with. So it's measured in terms of specific metrics that you can identify and reliably measure, whether it's number of users, amount of data, number of API calls, transaction volume. Usage billing, very important. It's not the opposite of subscriptions. You hear a lot in the media, in the press covering this space, conversations about how usage is going to replace subscriptions. Subscriptions are a form of a customer relationship. It's a relationship that you engage in and you sign a subscription agreement with your provider. That could involve fixed monthly charges, what most people refer to as subscription. That could involve usage charges, could involve a volume purchasing agreement, could involve a hybrid combination of many of us different factors. If you are thinking about deploying a consumption-based pricing model, you will need some technological investments. You're going to need to have a billing solution that can support the particular flavors of usage billing that you're planning to deploy, and technologies to not only convert raw usage data into invoices, but also provide audit trails and do this at a scale that's appropriate to your business. Just moving forward a tiny bit in terms of on a spectrum of complexity here, you can have usage billing that is postpaid, and you can have something that's prepaid. As the name implies, postpaid, you sign up for a contract, you start using at the end of the billing cycle, be it a month or a quarter, you get an invoice, and then it gets reset. And then if you're doing a prepaid relationship, usually you prepay for that in advance. You buy a block of usage, and then you work against that throughout the course of a billing cycle. When you have a situation when you have to handle a postpaid offering, you need to be aware of certain risk factors. You are going to bring in a lot of clients very quickly, because who doesn't want to try, free apple pie? Why not? So if I'm going to charge it based on slices of my apple pie, I need to make sure that I don't have people that are going to eat all the apple pie and not pay. So I need some assurance that I can extract money from them eventually. And if you're doing prepaid, you have to be also cognizant of simple things like people will exceed their usage. What happens afterwards? There are a lot of variations here. If you're familiar with your own plan for mobile data usage, or in the olden days it was telephone usage, then you're familiar with usage billing. Now, there are a lot of related capabilities that connect to these basic concepts of usage billing. I mentioned minimum spend. Some companies will tell you, yes, we will sell you something on a postpaid or prepaid basis, but we want to ensure that you spend at least a minimum amount every billing cycle. Call it a platform fee, call it minimum spend. That's what we're talking about. You're going to probably have requirements to inject into your pricing equation some level of tiering, where if a customer, buys 2 apple pie slices, they pay one price, but if they buy 20, the price could be somewhat discounted, and there are a lot of variations in that. Rating, being able to price things differently depending on various exogenous inputs and conditions, such as time of day, geography, weather, traffic congestion, and so on and so on. A lot of larger companies want to do agreements where they can sell their customers a volume purchasing agreement that says the more you consume, perhaps the less you pay, or at least there's a governance mechanism in place that defines how pricing is going to be adjusted based on consumption within one or more billing cycles. And then there is an almost infinite number of variations of that through various hybrid schemes where people say, look, you can start with a very basic plan, and then you can convert to something more complex over time. So I mentioned that if you're familiar with telephone billing or utility billing, you are already familiar with usage billing. In the early days, yes, this was the domain of major utilities, telephone utilities, communications companies, various kinds of utilities. In later years, sort of thinking about sort of the last 8 to 10 years, we have seen a lot of large cap tech companies, larger tech companies, really zero in on usage-based billing to drive adoption of many new services like cloud services. So you see every hyperscaler that's out there, AWS, Microsoft, Google, Oracle, IBM, they all have some sort of a consumption-based schema in place. Oftentimes that's tiered, oftentimes it's graduated, oftentimes it involves a volume purchasing contract. Similarly, with companies like Autodesk, Snowflake's been a champion of usage-based consumption. Lately, I would say in the last probably 3-4 years, we've seen a lot more focus on consumption-based models and data from much smaller companies. So the barrier to entry into consumption-based pricing is getting lower. So now you have a lot of various new suppliers of usage-based pricing that are aiming to sell this capability to smaller companies, even Series A and Series B venture-backed companies that maybe 20 years ago would have never touched that. So there's definitely gradual process of at least conceptual commoditization, where it's the usage consumption-based billing is moving into applications for monetizing API calls, events, outcomes, amount of data that you consume, amount of power somebody may consume. So there's definitely a broadening and really commoditization going on all at the same time. So what's driving all this interest? This clearly did not happen in a vacuum, clearly didn't happen in one day. It's been an overnight success that's taken 40 years. Customers definitely like usage billing. They like it from a standpoint that it requires no, in their mind anyway, requires no big upfront investment. It aligns their usage of your product with their financial responsibility. So an opportunity for the vendor, an opportunity for the user kind of seem to be more in alignment with each other as opposed to really orthogonal. It creates an opportunity for the vendors to onboard the users in a more frictionless manner. You don't necessarily need to go through a big negotiation process up front. It also creates an opportunity for some vendors to capture value that otherwise would be lost. Let's say you have an offering where you charge a number of seats for electronic design package, and over time you realize that you've sold the number of seats you're going to sell. After all, companies have only that many engineers and designers. How do you grow after that? Well, if some customers happen to be using a lot of data, they may be 2 standard deviations away from what the average is. Why not monetize that and offer them an upscale service in this area, but also monetize it as well? I think also we've seen with the economic environment right now being very uncertain, and that can be both good and bad. And in our research, we've been emphasizing that this is kind of economically the most uncertain environment probably on record. And during times of extreme uncertainty, a usage-based pricing mechanism is something that customers find appealing. We're often asked if we see usage billing and consumption-based models as essentially a separate marketplace. And the answer is no, we don't. We see usage billing, it's a feature of an existing agile billing marketplace. It's not but people buy a usage-based product instead of having a subscription-based product, or buy both. They buy one solution and they expect it to be able to provide capabilities across a whole spectrum of pricing models, which is what usage is. So I mentioned earlier that there's a pretty broad spectrum of complexity in consumption-based pricing models. You can start with something very basic, very complex on the left side of this chart, where you just take a measurement of how many apple slices somebody consumed in the course of a month, feed that into a system, and voila, you have a monthly invoice. Terrific. What if you are taking data from 10, 15, 100 different sources, where the format of apple pie slice consumption is different in every case? So you have to normalize that. Normalize dates, times, formats, syntax, semantics of everything. That makes it a little bit more complex. If you do it monthly, it's one level of complexity. Let's say you need to give your customers a sense of where things are, either in quick time or in real time, where customer will say, I want to know exactly where I stand at any point in the billing cycle. So you need to be able to be processing those incompatible data sources all at once, all the time. That makes it more complex. And if you have multiple real-time data sources, that again multiplies the complexity almost exponentially. Let's say you throw in tiered pricing into that. You throw in volume purchasing agreements. You throw in requirements for being able to audit the data in real time or quick time. So as you can see, this can multiply from very, very simple to very, very complex. And if you get into a process of trying to select a tool in this area and understand what you know and what you don't know, what you need and where you need to make investments, it's imperative to really just go through this analysis at least once to understand where you stand and what your requirements are now and where your requirements are likely to be in 24, 36 months from now. So remember earlier we talked about how usage billing can be very simple, can be very complex. There are quite a few challenges associated with usage billing. One of them is a business challenge, lack of predictability for both vendors and consumers. That's something that is a business issue that needs to be dealt with intelligently. Less complexity, we just talked about that. There are requirements to do audit, to do non-repudiation. There are requirements to scale the performance as you scale the volume and speed of data. There are requirements to handle very complex pricing model. But I think the most serious and complex requirement that companies need to get their heads around is data management. And the reason we highlight it is because most companies take it as a given that they have the data and they'll be able to feed the data into whatever monetization system platform they have, and everything will be just magically working fine. And reality is not everything is working fine. In most organizations that we get engaged to help them with their monetization strategy, we find that data hygiene is at least a challenge, a meaningful challenge, and in many places there isn't really a continuous process for constantly filtering and auditing the data and making sure that you're never feeding dirty data into your key financial systems. So we published, I think in last month, a research note that we called "Dirty Data Kills!" exclamation point. And the whole point of a note was that most financial systems and most enterprise systems have come to accept, you could say, the fact that there is a certain error rate in their data, that there's a certain amount of data pollution. And most companies will tell you that, look, we have a very small percentage of our data that hasn't been cleansed. We have made massive investments into master data management, into filtering the data on a continuous basis, and we still have some ways to go. And that's obviously all good, and that's the right strategy, is sort of to make it a continuous process, to really put the spotlight on that and not leave it to chance. There's no autopilot in this environment. We find that even if you have a fairly small amount of data error, maybe let's say, 1/10 of 1% of your data is missing, incomplete, out of sync, whatever gradation you choose here, that can translate into about a 1% revenue leakage. Because what happens when your data is damaged, when eventually it goes through financial systems, through processing, and invoices get generated, eventually statements are sent to customers, and customer looks at the invoice and says, oh, gee, yeah, that's wrong. But, we don't have a division anymore. It's been shut down 3 months ago, and we told the vendor about it. So why are we being still charged for that? So they can hold up, they can dispute the invoices, they can hold up payment, it can cause delays, it can essentially balloon your DSO to levels that are less than acceptable. So our vision for that report was actually almost like the signage you see sometimes on cigarette packs where they say smoking kills, and it's everybody's choice, obviously. So that was the point of this piece of research, and we sort of stand by it. What's been the kind of classic solution to dirty data, and what's kind of the best way to approach it, at least conceptually? So the key capability in this area is what everybody calls mediation. And if you talk about mediation to somebody from outside this space, they think of it as some sort of a legal process, some sort of a mediated agreement, elimination of dispute. And to some extent that's true, but that's applied to enterprise systems here. So you're eliminating dispute and friction in between variety of different systems. So a good mediation system will take data inputs from a variety of sources in batch and real time and quick time, and it will allow you to have the data be synchronized, kind of aligned to the same clock, same date, normalize some of the geographic specifics of the data, normalize syntax of the data, how long is each field, what is it, what's the format, and then the semantics, what does each field really mean? Are those concepts really aligned across different systems? So it really compensates for the fact that the way we build enterprise systems typically, even if it's in a controlled manner, those things happen typically as stovepipes in a vacuum, or we buy a company and they have 30 systems, and with 30 systems they had before were also acquired from a variety of companies. So there's a lot of reasons why this continues to persist as a serious problem, and why mediation remains very important, to be able to normalize the data, synchronize the data, make sure the data is complete, data is accurate, that there aren't missing fields, that the data is consistent, there isn't pollution inside the actual data fields. And without this capability, can you do usage billing? Only if you have a very simple use case scenario. Let's say you have a single source, batch, one set of data, it's easy to normalize, easy to cleanse, you run it for a cleansing mechanism, feed it into a billing system, you're home. But if you have anything more complex than that, you have to watch out, because basically it makes it much more complex on the receiving end once you start getting those disputes from customers or requests for an audit. This is a pretty big topic. We've published a number of pieces of research on that. You can go to our website and find them there. We could spend a whole day or days talking about the specifics of it and what the different flavors are, and how do you sort of put this into operational practice. So what are some of the things a company can do if you start building a journey for usage billing, whether you're doing it for the first time. Maybe you bought a company and they have a usage-based system and you want to introduce it more broadly. Should be some level of education. Make sure that your teams are aligned, that they sort of share common knowledge and the same set of facts about what your requirements are, what your capabilities are, what's working, what's not, and kind of make sure that this is done in a completely realistic fashion. Build a plan, and then sort of also plan for a meaningful amount of testing as you roll out any capabilities in this area. A few data points before we begin to close up here. So we are running a usage billing survey on essentially a continuous basis. And if you like to be invited to participate, let us know, and we'll be sure to send you an invitation to that. So as we surveyed various companies, what we find is right now about 60% of respondents were using some form of usage billing, or they plan to deploy it within the next 6 to 12 months. So the level of interest, I think, is reasonably high. And then if you look at organizations that are using usage billing and see it as critical, so 70% see actually real-time billing as being critical or important. So the level of interest actually surprised us. Zero, almost nobody is exclusively usage-based. This goes back to my comment that people don't want to buy just usage billing. They want to buy a solution, a monetization platform that can really address a broad spectrum of their requirements over time. And generally, companies that see usage billing as critical, they tend to be high growth companies, and many, it's not reflected in this slide, but many also are highly profitable as well. We've seen plenty of examples of that. So majority are growing revenue at above 20% threshold, and yet many also tell us that they see a lot of friction in the revenue channel as well. So that concludes some of my prepared remarks here. Just before we part, and I hand over the presentation to Inga and Yusuf. Some recent research, as I mentioned, dirty data kills. We also published a number of ratings and use cases for billing solutions, including a buyer's guide and market lenses. We also publish market sizing forecasts. And many of those are available to clients, subscribers. But then if you want to just get a bi-weekly newsletter, we publish something called the Margin. If you want to scan the code that's on the screen in front of you, that's a free newsletter that's available to everyone. We would welcome your participation. Okay. That concludes it. I will stop, and Inga, back to you.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to go ahead and share my slides here. All right. So let me introduce you to Yusuf Yagmar. Yusuf is the CEO of BluLogix, which is a leader in sort of the agile monetization space, particularly as it relates to complexity and data. Yusuf has worked in the industry for more than 20 years, in addition to being really an expert in the industry, is also a technical expert, particularly as it relates to data. So has a good amount of experience and a voice in the industry on how you really work this with your data staging and mediation from a best practices standpoint, helping customers to not just start up their operations in usage-based billing, but also to scale them, and looking at data across the spectrum of both usage and non-usage. Yusuf, I will hand it over to you now. I think you're on mute, so you may need to unmute.
Inga, thank you for that. And Igor, thank you for the introduction. I think a lot of the points that you've mentioned would feed right into what I'm going to cover. But there is a reason why we called it in the second headline that it's data staging and mediation. We simply believe that it's not just about the data, it is about the data and the process. And they both impact if you want to have a successful implementation of usage-based billing. So we'll talk a little bit about that today, and we will cover some of the aspects that are related to this. Slide. In the previous systems, as Igor mentioned, this consumption-based or usage-based billing has been out there in the industry, although it's been known in only certain verticals, but it has existed in the market and in the billing space for several decades. I think what is different today is that it is no longer the data challenge, the dirty data kills, as MGI says, because it isn't just about the usages. In today's digital space, although the concept is usage-based billing, the usages are not the only data that you have to feed into the billing system so that you can have a successful billing model, or even an advanced, if you like, usages billing business model in the system. In today's digital world, you basically have to deal with multiple data sources and multiple data types, and also multiple loading timeline in the billing process. Typically, when you want to look at a successful foundation of a good data staging and mediation tool and process, you're looking at three basic aspects. You want something that is real-time, but even the definition of real-time ingestion and real-time loading of data, the definition of that has changed a little bit, and I'll touch on it in a minute. The second pillar to this foundation is you need a complete data. So you have to make sure that what you establish in terms of collecting data from sources and the process that you're going to follow to process this data is going to be complete. Incomplete data will simply mean dirty data, and you will have impact on your billing and revenue and the scalability of the business. And then the last aspect of the foundation is you really need accurate data, and that means clean data, and that also means consistent data. So going back to the first point, which is real-time ingestion, in the past, people looked at real-time as I want to load data real-time so I can charge it and apply the pricing of it real-time and then push it to the billing system. That applies to prepaid models, as Igor just mentioned, and to postpaid. You would like to track that consumption and charge it and apply pricing for it, basically in real time. But today, the definition of real time has two aspects. It is real time when the data becomes available, and it is real time when you want to charge it. What has changed in today's digital world is that some of the pricing rules that you want to apply for usages and consumption actually depends on other types of data, especially when you want to go advanced in this concept of usages pricing. And that is, for example, when you want to do dynamic pricing, or when you want to do smart pricing, and we will talk about that a little bit towards the end of the presentation. So the foundation is basically real-time ingestion of data, complete data, and accurate, and then putting together the tools, the process, basically, and the right data set that you want to collect so that you can implement a successful strategy for data and mediation. When we look at this chart, you will see that actually what is impacting usage's business model, including pricing, is data that you will collect from the service platform, is data that you might be collecting from third-party providers or carriers, is data that you would be collecting from licenses and tracking of usage, or tracking of being live on a specific system, or downloading of licensing, reconciling that data that you have just loaded for usage pricing with existing data that you have in the system, or sometimes with previous data that you have processed in previous billing periods. All of that are now actually becoming part of this successful usage pricing and usage billing strategy. And sometimes you're waiting for some invoices to be loaded from the providers or third-party systems, and sometimes you're waiting for billing information. It isn't just about the consumption or the usages that you have tracked in your systems, but also additional information related to cost or related to billing data that you would get from other platforms. On the other side, in the back office, if you like, tools that you have to use, which is part of this, is now billing systems are completely and seamlessly integrated with CRMs. Most of your customer data isn't necessarily existing or available in the billing platform, but rather in the CRM, and it gets updated and it gets dynamically changing in the CRM, and you have to make sure that you load this because it is indirectly or sometimes even directly impacting usage pricing and usage billing. So it does impact the data staging and the mediation. Sometimes the quoting tool that you have to order, the order processing tools that you have to order. And if you're using an external contract management tool, all of these are actually platforms that feed data into the billing process, and it would impact usage pricing and usage billing. So as you can see, we're not only looking at just the consumption data that you have to load as usages so that you can price it, but all of these data sources are impacting the process. And until you have the right tools and the right process, and like I said, the right data as well, feeding into the system, you would not be able to have a successful implementation. Next slide. And these are examples of when you can load this data and at what stage in the billing process. A typical billing process will start by capturing orders, whether they're done online or through a means of a CPQ, for example. And throughout the process, you're going to go and activate the service, and then you provision the service, and then you start charging the service, and then you generate the bill at the end of a specific period. And then you're pushing all this data to finance and payment and the GL interface and your ERP system, and apply all kind of revenue and finance management tools to it. But the data that has to feed into the system and it will impact usages is actually loaded at different times and different stages of the billing process. And it is loaded from different systems, from customer details to contract details, to entitlement details, to catalog data that sometimes changes on the fly, to the service details that you load from different platform, be it a service platform or be it a task management platform, for example. So all of these data types are loaded into the billing process and actually will impact usages at different stages in the billing process. Next. This is a typical use case that comes actually from an implementation that we've done for for one of our customers. You will see that data is being loaded, not only being loaded, it's actually interacting with the system at different types of the loading process. All of it is going to impact usages, and all of it is going to impact the billing that has to be generated to the customer, whether it is pure usages or typical billing of subscription type, of recurring type, or even sometimes the one-time charge. All these now charges are actually interacting with each other and impacting the usage billing model. We start by loading and preparing the data for usages at the very early stages of the billing cycle. So data is being reconciled on the catalog side, services being updated, new services are being quoted to customers, and that impacts basically what you're expecting as usages and as consumption, or what you're going to charge customers. Customer data, orders data, these could be generating, in this case, they're actually being managed through a third-party system. So this data has to be loaded at the right time. And you will notice that we've actually did the implementation with API integration because we want this to be scalable. We don't want manual intervention. We want systems to load all of this data automatically and let the people that are in charge of this process just look at a dashboard, just make sure that everything is running, no exceptions are being generated so that you have to deal with them. And if there is anything, which will always happen, then you've got the right tools and the right process to deal with it. Then at the right time, you start ingesting the consumption-related data or the usages-related data, and sometimes even the recurring-related data, especially when you have data that is being provided by a third-party system that the customer is directly interacting with and applying changes to it that did not go through the normal billing cycle from order to activation. Sometimes you're actually act as a customer of the billing system, you're actually activating a service on a third-party system, yet that service which has been updated, added, deleted, or changed, it would have to be loaded into this billing process, including usages, and it would have to feed into the billing at the end of the period. And then once you've generated all the financial data, including invoices and adjustments, then you have to feed this data into the ERP systems. And sometimes you actually have to load data from the ERP system, sometimes before the actual billing, and sometimes after the billing. Examples of that, payments that are being processed outside of the billing system, and you want to reconcile and allocate invoices and close both invoices and payments so that you have a proper aging management of your receivables. And sometimes you're actually loading information that are related to adjustments that are happening on the ERP side. So there are data that are basically interactive between the ERP and the system, and it does impact your billing process. So again, emphasizing the point that actually data staging and mediation doesn't only touch the usages, but it touches different data components. And in an automated, in an ideal environment where most of your transactions are automated and are scalable and are done by integration, is actually taken care of. And no data dependency is left behind, and no data gaps, which will introduce many challenges that we will talk about in a minute. So you want to make sure that this is taken care of. Next. This was a typical mediation that we had. One of the biggest differences between the previous world of data mediation and today's digital world is all the data that you actually need for billing and in the usages billing model is that you actually load the entire data before you process billing. Even if you're doing it real time, you load the data, you have all the data that you need for billing, and then you start applying pricing and charging to those usages events. That's typically how the old and legacy mediation did the job. In today's billing environment and digital space, this is actually interactive. You load a piece of data in a specific stage and from a specific platform, and then you sometimes have to wait for another piece of data that has to come from another platform. So now mediation has to manage the time and has to manage the dependency and has to manage the extraction and the compatibility and reconciliation between multiple sources. That is one of the major differences between the old tools of mediation and today's tools of mediation. That's why we call it data staging and mediation. It isn't only mediation, and it should allow that kind of interaction throughout the billing process at any point in time when that data is needed. Next. With that said about data staging and mediation and what feeds into it, these are some example or some of the challenges that would actually cause this process to fail. And that's what you want to avoid when you're doing it. And obviously, the first thing is inaccurate data. Inaccuracy could mean that the systems that are generating this data are not producing consistent data, are not producing complete data, or are producing errors, which means that all the rules that you have put in place to handle the data, ingest the data, reconcile the data, and transform the data, and then push the data for billing are basically throwing a lot of exceptions in there. So that is one challenge that you have to do, and you have to make sure that you put in place the process to handle that. These processes could be of technical nature, or could be sometimes a process within the organization, so that these things are loaded. One of the important functionality that you want to look at that when you face a situation like this is in your tools that you're going to use for data staging and mediation, you have the option and the capability to actually reprocess the data after you fix it. So that means reloading it without losing integrity, without inheriting duplicates. You want to make sure that you've got the process to handle that. The second one is data in incomplete challenge. Incompleteness may actually mean data content and may mean actually data formats. Data are changing dynamically, and everything I'm using as a reason to fail is something that we have we have come across and we have actually had to deal with in the different projects that we've worked on. So this is a typical challenge in that incompatibility. So incompatibility on the format side and incompatibility on the content, and sometimes incompatibility between the data that you load from one platform and you have to reconcile and compare with data that comes from another platform. The lack of transformation in the process of, I got some data, it's raw, I have to apply some ETL rules. Now in the transformation process, I need to apply some intelligence, or I need to do some reconciliation, like I said, either from different sources or from pre-existing data that does exist in the billing platform. This is where some of the failure happens, and you have to have the right process and the right tools to deal with that. And sometimes as a result of this, you're actually taking actions that are not only usages related and pricing related. It could actually mean that you may have to create some customers that have been created throughout this process, but they don't exist in the billing system, either because an order or a new customer that's been created by another system, a usages that you got basically from the normal loading process for a customer that didn't exist. Naturally, that goes into some sort of failure, and you have to have a process to go and say, okay, what do I do with that? With that failed transformation? How am I going to add that missing customer? Or is that a missing customer? Or is that a terminated customer for which I'm getting a transaction that I have to deal with? These are examples of why this failure can happen. The overload impacts on, it has basically two impacts: overload on the data itself and overload on the performance of the platform, which means you need to make sure that you've got enough scalability and power, in the platform that can handle large volume, that can handle critical data, and can also handle interdependencies between the data objects that you're loading at different times. You need to have enough validation tools to look at the quality of data. The quality can cover multiple aspects: formats, inconsistency, completeness, change of rules, change of orders. You could take multiple examples of things that dynamically happen and are changed dynamically by, like I said, the outside platforms that you have no control over. So you have to have mechanism in place to deal with that and to fix it at the same time. You would like to streamline the loading of this data through integration as much as possible. Use API of some sort, or at least electronic file exchange that loads automatically into the system, and avoid manual manipulation of this stuff. Every time you need a manual handling of some sort, that means the business is not scalable, and you've got the risk of human errors, and you've got the risk of revenue loss and scalability challenges. Next. So these are some of the impacts that you will have if you have a failed process in the data loading and in the data staging and mediation. The first one, of course, which everybody cares about from a monetary perspective, and that's the loss of revenue. The loss of revenue because you didn't load the data, you didn't load the full data, or you were not able to process the full data, or you got the data very late, or you missed on it before the billing. Any of these dependency or any of these factors, or because of some human errors, because you still have manual steps that you've got to take before loading the data, all of that will actually have financial impact on the revenue, and you're basically just losing revenue that shouldn't be losing. When you don't have a streamlined and an automated data process, that becomes costly, because you have to throw more people at fixing it. You have to delay the billing process, as we will see in the next slide, or you have to throw more people at it, or you have to reprocess it multiple times. All of that has impact on scalability and impact on the cost of producing those invoices and delivering accurate billing to your customers. When you have any of these two, when you have inaccurate billing as a result of this one, then you're causing a lot of customer dissatisfaction. Billing errors will, if repeatedly happens, it will lead to high percentage of customer churn. Customers will likely leave you when you're not producing accurate billing and consistent billing at the same time. One of the risks of compliances is being able to audit everything, and auditing goes from the process or the stage of loading the data to the actual details of extracting the information or transforming the information. It is very important to track and audit every step of the way. One of the areas that we like to insist and emphasize on when we're doing the implementation of data staging and mediation tools is to make sure that there is an archive copy of every stage of the data through this process of data staging and mediation. When you transform it, a copy of that and an audit log has been entered into the system for these changes, it helps you track backlog, it helps you identify those exceptions that happens repeatedly, and it also helps you go and fix those errors, sometimes from the source, because sometimes you don't have control on why these exceptions are happening. So by tracking these and auditing them, you can actually use this data to go and fix it from the source. Naturally, when you have these two challenges, it will delay invoicing. Instead of billing on the date where you are supposed to generate the invoice and send it to the customer, if you're late, that has an impact on your revenue, that has an impact on your cash flow, that also has an impact on customer satisfaction. If customers are expecting to receive the invoice on the 5th of the month and you're sending it on the 10th or the 15th, that also impacts your customers' cash flow and ability to pay, and that might generate customer dissatisfaction, which could lead to customer churn. Inaccurate billing is a huge challenge in the process. It does impact revenue. It does impact, like I said, customer satisfaction. It does impact the operation and scalability, because you continuously have to fix billing errors, and you end up doing a lot of adjustments and sometimes a lot of reprocessing. Remember, in many cases, processing of billing and processing of usages and processing of billing impacts taxes and impacts ERP systems and impacts cash flow and impacts even the management of your receivables and aging. Next. The integration challenges, if you realize and now recognize that actually it is not just usages data, but it's all these data that you have to collect from multiple sources in a timely fashion. And timely doesn't just mean real time. Timely means at the right time when the dependency is actually waiting for this data to be loaded. So all of that actually means timely integration. So when you are integrating with multiple sources and when you have to load data from multiple sources, then you want to consider API integration, or at least, like I said, electronic file exchange if data, because some of the systems will not provide you APIs, or the size of data that you have to load is actually so big that maybe an API call is not the optimal way from a performance and load management perspective. So you have to make sure that you have the right technical tools to load and consume large data in a timely fashion. Then obviously the lack of that causes scalability issues, and any scalability means if you don't have it, you need to deal with these challenges manually, and whenever you have manual intervention, then you have the risk of human errors, you have the risk of delay, you have the challenge of scalability, and you have the risk of losing revenue. Next. So to avoid that, let's go to the basic premise here. Is you need the right data, you need the right process, and you need the right tools to deal with that. What we found to be very critical and very helpful at the same time in addressing these challenges and dealing with these problems is to actually give an interactive and very powerful dashboard. So you would like to actually have that as part of the tools that you're using. Interactive dashboard, kind of summarizing what is happening in the different phases of your data staging and mediation, tracking all the different stages, providing you with statistics and providing you with suggested actions, and sometimes taking the actions to take care of these data challenges that you face automatically, or at least by letting you know that these are the actions that you have to take, and you simply just need to verify or accept. Automation obviously would be preferred whenever you can, but sometimes that dashboard will help you take the right decisions and will help you monitor what's going on. So these are the right tools. When you have that, this is what you will do to stage and mediate and have a successful implementation. Visualization and control, integration, standardization, governance, real-time management, and data cleaning. These are the main points that we wanted to cover. I did have a couple of slides to talk, but I think we're running out of time. So I'm going to wrap it up right here and leave some time for questions and allow you to ask whatever you want. And if we get a chance to talk about some of the future slides, we can do it. Inga, if we allow time for questions, I don't think we should overrun.
I think we are actually up on time already right now. I'm going to take the questions that have been submitted, and then we'll reach out to people individually and answer those questions, as well as sending the slide deck out, which will cover a couple of additional points I think that we were going to make as far as the how to avoid the pitfalls here, as well as then future trends as well. If you want to take just one quick minute to talk about the future trends, I know that dynamic pricing and smart pricing were a couple of things that we really thought were critical here.
This is, there was an interesting point about AI and the use of AI and whether we should use AI or instead of mediation. Actually, AI, there's a couple of points that I would like to have. Number one, the maturity of AI with numbers in the industry is still not that reliable yet. So AI becoming a component of mediation is actually a good tool to have, but using AI instead of mediation is not, the industry and the technology and the maturity of it isn't there yet, simply just because of the numbers challenge. And two aspects that I wanted to highlight, which is smart pricing versus dynamic pricing. Dynamic pricing is a term that's been coming up a lot in the industry, being able to identify or choose the price or calculate the price on the fly as the usages are being loaded or as the consumption happens. We would like to actually take that one step further and add to dynamic pricing the concept of smart pricing, which is allowing to create additional dependency from pre-existing data or from data that loads from other systems to help you make smart pricing decisions on top of dynamic. This is just a point that I wanted to highlight, and we will stop right here.
All right. Like I said, we will take the questions and answer them individually, reaching out to you, as well as sending the deck out. There are a couple of items in the appendix that you may find interesting, such as how data is impacting usage from a future trend perspective. So again, thank you so much for attending our webinar, and thank you to Yusuf and Igor for, I think, some tremendously informative information and data points. Like I said, if you have any additional questions, feel free to send them over and we will get back to you with those answers. And thank you so much to everyone for participating. And thank you, Igor and Yusuf, again, for the great information that you shared with us.
Thanks for having us. Thanks.
All right. Thank you.